whispered through the ancient forest. "Welcome, my friend. Draw a little closer and let the noise of the distant world fade behind you. Beyond the bright lanes of civilization lie forgotten valleys where old promises sleep beneath stone, and even silence seems to remember what history has chosen to forget. Tonight we follow faint tracks into that hidden wilderness where every shadow guards a secret and every step carries the weight of ages. Come, the path is waiting." The Republic had long ago mapped the great trade routes and charted the bright worlds where senators argued, merchants prospered, and Jedi walked openly beneath welcoming skies. Yet beyond those familiar lanes stretched countless systems that appeared on star charts only as dim names, surrounded by empty space, places where distress calls often died before reaching Coruscant. One such world drifted around a pale orange star in the outer rim, wrapped in endless forests, broken by jagged mountains of black stone. Rain fell there almost every afternoon, washing crimson soil into narrow rivers that cut through ancient valleys older than any living memory. Hidden among those valleys stood a modest Jedi watch station built generations before, little more than a stone hall, a landing platform, and a communications tower. It had never been meant to defend against war. Its purpose was simple: observe, protect, and quietly keep the peace where the Republic's reach faded into silence. Jedi Watchman Taran Vallis stood alone upon the tower's observation platform as dusk settled over the endless canopy. Moist wind tugged at his weathered robes, while distant thunder rolled behind the mountains, and his eyes remained fixed upon the darkening forest where nothing seemed to move. He had served on this forgotten assignment for nearly 7 standard years, without complaint, believing patience to be as valuable as any lightsaber technique. During those years, he had settled disputes between settlers, rescued lost children, and driven away slavers who mistook isolation for weakness. Yet during the last month, the forests had changed in subtle ways that no ordinary traveler would notice. Birds no longer sang before sunset. Hunting beasts abandoned familiar trails, and every night the silence lingered just a little longer than it should have. He rested both hands upon the cold stone railing and reached gently into the Force, expecting the familiar harmony that always surrounded living things. Instead, he found scattered fragments of unease, as though thousands of voices whispered beneath deep water where no words could be understood. His breathing slowed, disciplined by years of Jedi training, but the feeling refused to fade. It was not the sharp hatred that accompanied the dark side in open conflict, nor the violent storm of anger that marked a Sith presence. This sensation felt older, concealed beneath layers of careful restraint, like blood hidden beneath fresh earth after heavy rain. Taran frowned despite himself, knowing that instinct had preserved many Jedi long before evidence ever appeared. A soft chime echoed from inside the tower, pulling him away from the growing darkness beyond the trees. He crossed the narrow chamber where flickering consoles cast blue light across shelves filled with weather records, local maps, and handwritten journals that no archive on Coruscant would ever request. The communications terminal displayed an encrypted priority signal addressed only to the Jedi Council. Taran entered his authorization codes and activated a secure recording crystal, his expression calm, although worry settled deeper behind his eyes. Watchman Taran Vallis reporting from Outpost RX-7, He began in an even voice. Unusual disappearances continue among isolated settlements. Wildlife behavior has altered across 3 provinces. I sense a presence that remains hidden from direct perception, yet leaves unmistakable disturbance in the force. He paused before continuing, replaying the previous week's events in his mind with painful clarity. 3 families had vanished from a logging village without signs of struggle, leaving untouched meals upon their tables and doors, standing open to the rain. A freight convoy disappeared while traveling along a canyon road, though its heavy transports were later discovered abandoned with their cargo still secured inside. Even stranger were the crimson markings painted across stones near every abandoned site, symbols unlike any language recorded in local history. Archaeologists from the colony capital had insisted they were meaningless patterns created by frightened settlers, but Terran had examined each mark himself. Someone had drawn them deliberately with patience and precision that suggested ritual rather than madness. The recording crystal continued to glow as he lowered his voice. I request immediate investigation by a senior member of the Order. Conventional explanations no longer account for these events, and local authorities have begun blaming raiders without supporting evidence. He hesitated once more, feeling almost embarrassed by the final observation he was about to report. Jedi were trained to distinguish intuition from fear, and fear from imagination. Yet this impression refused to release its grip. There is one additional matter. Each time I meditate near the market sites, I hear the same words in the Force, though no speaker is present. They are always identical. Terran looked toward the rain-streaked window before finishing quietly. The blood remembers. The shadows are awake. Far above the world, a sleek Jedi courier emerged from hyperspace and turned toward the shining heart of the Republic. Inside its encrypted memory banks rested Terran's message, protected by codes that only the High Council could open. The journey would require several days through safe hyperlanes before reaching Coruscant, and the automated vessel possessed neither curiosity nor fear. It simply obeyed its course, engines humming steadily against the silence of space. Had anyone watched from the darkness between stars, the courier would have appeared insignificant beside the vast emptiness surrounding it. Yet within that tiny craft traveled knowledge, capable of changing the course of lives, far beyond the forgotten forests below. Night settled completely over the colony before the first scream echoed through the trees. Terran was already moving before the sound reached its end, his green lightsaber snapping to life with a familiar hiss that filled the damp air with emerald light. He raced along a narrow trail toward a nearby farming settlement less than 2 kilometers from the outpost, leaping fallen logs and shallow streams with practiced ease. The Force flowed around him, sharpening every sense until each raindrop seemed suspended for an instant before striking the ground. Another cry followed, shorter this time, abruptly cut off. Then came silence, so complete that even the storm seemed to hesitate. The settlement appeared exactly as it had that afternoon, yet every instinct warned him something was terribly wrong. Lanterns still burned beside doorways, casting warm circles of light across muddy streets where no one walked. Cooking fires crackled unattended beneath iron pots, filling the damp air with the scent of roasted grain and smoked meat. A child's wooden toy rested in the center of the road beside tiny footprints that vanished after only a few steps. Taryn advanced carefully, lightsaber held low rather than raised for attack, because the absence of movement disturbed him more than open violence ever could. Nothing answered his cautious calls except the steady whisper of rain upon rooftops. He entered the nearest home and found cups still warm upon the table, one overturned as though someone had risen in sudden surprise. Blankets lay scattered across sleeping mats, and a family portrait hung crooked upon the wall where it had apparently been brushed aside in haste. There was no sign of struggle, no broken furniture, and no trace of blaster fire. Only a single crimson symbol stained the stone floor near the doorway, painted with remarkable care, despite the urgency the abandoned room suggested. Kneeling beside it, Taryn resisted the urge to touch the mark. Instead, he reached through the force and recoiled as a cold emptiness answered him. Not pain, not rage, but an unsettling absence, where living echoes should have remained. A faint sound drifted from beyond the final house, barely audible beneath the rainfall. Taryn extinguished his lightsaber at once and slipped between narrow buildings until he reached the edge of the settlement overlooking the forest. There, at the boundary where cultivated land surrendered to ancient wilderness, stood 7 hooded figures in dark robes. None carried visible weapons, and each remained perfectly still while facing the trees rather than the village behind them. Before Taryn could speak, every figure stepped forward together into the shadows beneath the towering branches. They did not run, yet within seconds, the forest had swallowed them completely. He pursued without hesitation, following broken ferns and disturbed mud illuminated by flashes of distant lightning. The trail should have been obvious, for 7 people crossing soaked ground would leave countless tracks. But after less than 100 meters, every footprint simply ended. Taryn searched the surrounding earth in disbelief, sweeping his gaze across tangled roots and glistening stones, while the force offered no clear direction. It was as though his quarry had dissolved into the night itself. A chill crept through him that had nothing to do with the rain. For the first time since becoming a Jedi Knight, he realized he was hunting an enemy that seemed determined to leave neither trace nor presence behind. When dawn finally broke through thinning clouds, the settlement remained empty. Local militia arrived from neighboring communities, speaking anxiously over one another as they searched every building and every nearby trail. Some insisted pirates had taken the villagers aboard hidden transports during the storm, while others whispered of ghosts from forgotten legends that older colonists still feared. Taryn listened without argument, yet none of those explanations matched what he had witnessed with his own eyes. Before returning to the watch station, he looked once toward the silent forest, where mist drifted between towering trees like pale spirits. Deep within that endless wilderness, something had awakened, and although he could not yet name it, he knew with absolute certainty that the message already racing toward Coruscant had not been sent a moment too soon. Morning spread slowly across the valley, though the light brought little comfort to those gathered within the abandoned settlement. Militia officers moved from house to house recording names, counting possessions left behind, and searching for any sign that the missing families had departed of their own will. The work became stranger with every passing hour because nothing of value had been taken. Credit chips remained locked inside storage chests, tools rested neatly upon workshop benches, and domesticated animals wandered the muddy streets, waiting for masters who never returned. Terran Vallis watched the investigation in silence, his expression unchanged even as unease settled deeper within him. The villagers searched for ordinary answers because ordinary answers were all they possessed. Captain Darren Soul, commander of the local security force, approached the Jedi with boots soaked through by the night's rain. He was a broad-shouldered man whose beard had begun to gray after decades spent protecting isolated settlements from raiders and predators alike. "My people are frightened," he admitted without ceremony, stopping beside the strange crimson mark outside the largest home. "If I tell them pirates did this, they will demand patrols. If I tell them nothing, they will abandon the valley before the next harvest." Terran studied the captain's tired face before replying, aware that certainty could be more dangerous than ignorance when it rested upon false assumptions. "Promise them only what you know," he said quietly. "Everything else is a path toward fear." The captain glanced toward the painted symbol with visible discomfort. "My grandfather spoke of signs like these," he murmured after a moment's hesitation. Old stories from the first settlers claimed there were tribes living deep within the mountains before the Republic ever found this world. They vanished long ago, but they believed blood carried memory from one generation to the next. Most dismissed the tales as campfire legends. Terran knelt once more beside the symbol, examining the careful lines without touching the crimson pigment. "Legends often grow from truth," he answered, "though truth rarely survives unchanged." The thought lingered in his mind long after the conversation ended, refusing to settle into anything that resembled certainty. By midday, he completed a careful inspection of every building in the settlement, finding nothing beyond the same unsettling pattern repeated again and again. Meals remained unfinished, doors stood open, and signs of ordinary life ended in an instant without struggle. The force whispered faint echoes of fear trapped within the empty homes, yet those echoes faded before revealing what had caused them. Terran had investigated kidnappings before, and even the most disciplined criminals left behind confusion, desperation, or anger. Here there was something different. It felt as though the living presence of the villagers had simply been lifted away, leaving their surroundings untouched. Unable to ignore the growing mystery, he returned alone to the edge of the forest where he had last seen the hooded figures. Rain had softened the ground into deep mud, preserving tracks that ordinary investigators had overlooked in the fading darkness. He crouched low, brushing aside fallen leaves, until he uncovered a series of narrow impressions. Unlike the boots worn by settlers or militia, the footprints were astonishingly light, barely disturbing the earth despite the weight any traveler should have carried. Stranger still, each print appeared only once. There were no returning tracks, no overlapping paths, only a single silent procession leading deeper into the ancient woods. The trail wound beneath towering trees whose twisted roots burst through the crimson soil like the ribs of buried giants. Moss-covered broken stone pillars half consumed by centuries of patient growth, hinting that someone had once built structures here before the forest reclaimed them. Every few hundred meters, Terran discovered another crimson symbol, painted upon bark or weathered rock, each one identical to the last. They did not point in any direction or form recognizable writing. Instead, they marked a route with deliberate precision, almost inviting pursuit. While concealing its destination, he kept his senses extended through the Force, yet the strange emptiness remained, masking whoever had passed this way. Hours later, the trail emerged beside a narrow river flowing between cliffs streaked with black mineral veins. There, Terran found the first undeniable evidence of violence. A colony speeder rested half-submerged near the bank, its canopy shattered and its engine compartment torn open by something stronger than simple collision damage. One of the militia scouts, assigned to search the valley, lay nearby beneath a blanket of wet leaves. The man's blaster remained holstered, his communicator untouched, and there were no visible wounds upon his body. Terran knelt beside him, placing 2 fingers gently against the scout's neck. Life had departed only a few hours earlier. The Jedi closed his eyes and reached carefully into the Force, seeking the final moments preserved within the place. Images emerged only in fragments. The scout had hidden behind the damaged speeder, watching figures move silently across the opposite bank. He had attempted to raise his communicator before suddenly turning towards someone standing directly behind him. There should have been fear, surprise, perhaps even the flash of a weapon. Instead, the vision ended with a sensation unlike anything Terran had ever experienced. The man's presence simply vanished, swallowed by a darkness that left no emotional imprint behind. A sharp crack echoed from the cliffs above. Terran moved instinctively, igniting his lightsaber as a heavy stone shattered against the ground where he had knelt a heartbeat earlier. More rocks tumbled from the heights, not thrown with great force, but carefully aimed to drive him toward the river. He leaped backward as another struck the earth, scattering mud across his robes, then looked upward through sheets of drifting mist. 3 dark silhouettes appeared briefly among the jagged rocks before disappearing behind the ridge. They had revealed themselves only long enough to confirm that he was no longer the hunter. Without hesitation, Terran climbed after them, using narrow ledges and exposed roots to scale the steep cliff. Loose stones slipped beneath his boots, rattling into the river below while cold wind rushed through the narrow pass above. Reaching the summit, he found no waiting ambush. Instead, the ridge opened onto an ancient stone roadway, almost completely hidden beneath moss and tangled vines. Massive carved blocks stretched into the forest in both directions, weathered by centuries, until only faint traces of their original craftsmanship remained. Whoever had built this road had possessed remarkable skill, and their work predated every colony on the planet. He followed the road until it ended before the ruins of a circular temple nestled within towering trees. Half its walls had collapsed inward, allowing vines to creep across cracked statues whose faces had long ago been worn smooth by wind and rain. Strange carvings covered the remaining pillars, depicting figures lifting bowls toward the stars while streams flowed from their hands to the earth below. None of the images resembled Sith iconography recorded in the Jedi archives, nor did they resemble the sacred art of any known Force tradition Terran had studied. The temple felt abandoned, yet not empty. Near the center of the ruined sanctuary rested a stone basin blackened by age. Fresh crimson stains marked its rim, still wet despite the passing rain, and beside it lay a small object wrapped in coarse gray cloth. Taryn opened the bundle cautiously. Inside rested a wooden pendant carved into the shape of a soaring bird, its edges polished smooth from years of handling. He recognized it immediately. 2 days earlier, a young girl named Lisa had proudly shown him the pendant, explaining that her father had carved it for her birthday. She was one of the children who had disappeared during the night. Before he could examine the basin further, a faint mechanical tone chirped from the communicator clipped beneath his robes. The encrypted channel identified the transmission as originating directly from the Jedi temple on Coruscant. Taryn activated it at once, expecting instructions from the council after his urgent report had arrived. Instead, the calm voice of a temple communications officer filled the silent ruin. "Watchman Valis, your message has been received and reviewed. Grand Master Yoda has departed Coruscant aboard a Jedi courier. His estimated arrival is 46 standard hours." Taryn looked across the forgotten temple where blood still glistened upon ancient stone, and for the first time since the mystery had begun, a quiet measure of hope settled within him. Whatever waited in the forests of this forgotten world, he would not face it alone. The rain returned before sunset, sweeping across the ancient temple in long gray curtains that blurred the distant trees into shifting shadows. Taryn Valis remained within the ruined sanctuary long after the transmission ended, studying every carved stone with the patience expected of a Jedi watchman. He photographed each symbol, measured the basin, and carefully sealed the small wooden pendant inside an evidence pouch. Nothing suggested random violence. Every detail carried the unmistakable mark of preparation, as though those responsible had rehearsed their movements countless times before ever striking the settlements. The realization troubled him more deeply than the disappearances themselves. Chaos was difficult to predict, but careful planning hinted at a purpose still hidden beyond his sight. He extended his awareness through the Force once again, allowing the familiar currents of life to drift around him. Small creatures sheltered beneath roots, insects crawled through soaked moss, and birds slowly returned to the higher branches after the storm's first outburst. Beneath those ordinary rhythms lingered the same unnatural emptiness that had haunted every place touched by the crimson symbols. It did not spread like the corruption left by dark side rituals recorded in the Jedi archives. Instead, it behaved like a carefully concealed wound beneath healthy skin, invisible until touched directly. Taryn lowered his hand from the stone basin, frustrated that every answer seemed to dissolve the instant he reached toward it. A sudden movement caught his attention near the temple entrance. A boy no older than 12 stood beneath the broken archway, soaked by the rain and breathing heavily after what must have been a desperate run through the forest. Mud covered his boots. One sleeve had been torn nearly to the shoulder, and a fresh scrape crossed his cheek. The child stared at the green glow of the Jedi's lightsaber with wide, frightened eyes before finding enough strength to speak. "Don't let them see me," he whispered, glancing repeatedly toward the trees behind him. "Please, they'll come back if they know I'm here." Taryn extinguished his blade at once and crossed the ruined chamber with measured calm. He knelt until he met the boy's gaze without towering over him, careful to keep his voice steady despite the urgency growing within him. "You are safe for the moment," he said. "Tell me your name." The boy swallowed hard before answering. Keelan. My family lived near the southern logging camps. Taryn recognized the settlement immediately. It had ceased communications nearly 5 days earlier, and local authorities had assumed damaged transmitters were responsible. The boy accepted a field ration and a flask of clean water with trembling hands, eating as though he had not seen food in days. Between hurried breaths, he described what had happened after sunset in his village. Strange figures had entered without torches or vehicles, moving silently through the streets, while everyone seemed strangely unable to wake fully from sleep. Keelan had hidden beneath loose floorboards after hearing his father's warning only moments before the voices reached their home. Through narrow cracks, he had watched hooded strangers lead neighbors outside without chains or visible threats. Nobody fought them, he whispered. It was like everyone forgot how. Taryn listened without interruption, weighing every detail against what he already knew. Did you see their faces? He asked quietly. Keelan shook his head at once. Never. Their hoods stayed down, even when the wind blew. The boy hesitated, his expression tightening as though recalling something he wished he could forget. One of them stopped beside my hiding place. I thought he heard me. His breathing quickened despite himself. He looked straight at the floor where I was hiding. Then he said, "Not this one. His blood is silent." After that, they left. The words settled heavily between them. Taryn concealed his reaction, though his thoughts immediately turned toward the repeated phrase from his report. Blood remembers. Until now, he considered the expression symbolic, perhaps tied to forgotten beliefs or ritual tradition. Keelan's account suggested something far more deliberate. The kidnappers were choosing specific people rather than taking entire communities at random. Whatever they sought, they believed it existed within certain bloodlines, and somehow they possessed a method of recognizing those they wanted. The storm intensified outside, thunder rolling across the mountains as darkness gathered once more beneath the towering trees. Taryn activated a small beacon inside the temple, transmitting his position toward the watch station without revealing it beyond local range. Captain Soul would know where to find him after dawn if necessary. For now, moving through the forest with an exhausted child would invite unnecessary danger. The ruined sanctuary offered poor shelter, but its thick stone walls still resisted the worst of the weather. Taryn quietly hoped they would prove equally resistant to whatever hunted these woods. Keelan fell asleep against one of the fallen columns before long, exhaustion overcoming fear at last. Taryn remained awake, seated cross-legged near the entrance, while his senses reached outward through the force. Hours passed without disturbance beyond the steady rhythm of rain striking ancient stone. Then, shortly after midnight, every sound in the forest stopped at once. The insects fell silent. The wind vanished. Even the river below the cliff seemed strangely distant. Taryn opened his eyes immediately, his hand already resting upon the hilt of his lightsaber. Someone was approaching. The footsteps were almost impossibly quiet, yet they carried neither urgency nor hesitation. They advanced with slow confidence through the darkness beyond the temple walls until a lone figure emerged beneath the broken arch. The newcomer wore a dark hooded cloak stained by rain, but unlike the others Taryn had glimpsed before, this individual carried no attempt at concealment. Pale hands remained visible, empty and relaxed at either side. The figure stopped just beyond the threshold without speaking, as though waiting to be acknowledged. For several long moments, neither of them moved. "I know you are awake, Jedi," the stranger said at last. The voice belonged to a woman, calm and surprisingly young, carrying no trace of anger or triumph. "If I wished you dead, others would have come instead." Terran rose slowly, his expression composed, while Keelan continued sleeping, only a few meters away. "Then speak your purpose," he answered. "Words are easier to understand than hidden footsteps." A faint laugh escaped beneath the hood, almost touched by sadness. "Understanding is precisely what brought you here." The woman reached into her cloak with deliberate care. Terran's stance shifted instantly, though she withdrew no weapon. Instead, she placed a small object upon the rain-soaked stone between them and stepped backward into the darkness. "Take this to your master," she said. "Tell him the debt has awakened." Before Terran could question her further, she turned and disappeared among the trees with astonishing speed. He pursued only a few steps beyond the arch before realizing the forest ahead stood completely empty. Once again, no presence remained within the force. Returning cautiously to the entrance, he examined the object she left behind. It was an old Republic credit medallion, unlike modern currency, struck from tarnished silver whose edges had worn smooth with age. One side bore the faded crest of the Galactic Republic from centuries past. The reverse displayed an engraved number and the emblem of the Jedi Order, though both had been deliberately scored by deep blade marks, crossing them from edge to edge. Around the medallion's rim, someone had carved tiny words, almost invisible beneath the rain. Terran leaned closer until he could read them clearly. "The account is written in blood. Neo." Sleep never returned that night. As dawn slowly painted the eastern sky with pale gold, Terran secured the ancient medallion beside the wooden pendant and prepared to leave the ruined temple. The mystery had changed. What first appeared to be isolated disappearances now carried unmistakable signs of history, reaching far beyond this forgotten world. Someone knew of the Jedi Order, someone expected Grand Master Yoda himself to come, and somewhere within the endless forests, unseen eyes were already waiting for his arrival. 46 standard hours after departing Coruscant, a slender Jedi courier descended through the cloud layers and emerged above the endless green canopy of the outer rim world. Morning sunlight broke between towering storm clouds, casting moving bands of gold across rivers that wound through the forests like polished metal. The vessel crossed above abandoned logging camps, silent valleys, and lonely mountain ridges before angling toward the modest landing platform of Outpost RX-7. Its engines settled into a quiet hum as landing struts touched weathered durasteel. The hatch opened without ceremony, and the smallest passenger aboard stepped onto the platform with measured confidence. Master Yoda leaned lightly upon his Geimer stick, his ancient eyes sweeping across the valley with calm attention before he spoke a single word. "Heavy," he murmured almost to himself. "The air is." Terran Vallis waited at the foot of the ramp beside Captain Darren Soul and 2 militia officers, each bowing respectfully as the Grand Master approached. Yoda acknowledged the greeting with a slight inclination of his head, though his attention lingered on the forest beyond the outpost, rather than the welcoming party before him. Age had bent his frame, but nothing about him suggested weakness. His gaze moved from mountain to valley with quiet precision, as though listening to conversations no one else could hear. "Your message received we did," he said, turning toward Terran. "Troubling it was. Show me everything. Miss nothing." Inside the watch station, records covered the central table from one end to the other. Maps marked every disappearance, photographs displayed the crimson symbols, and neatly labeled evidence containers held fragments gathered over the past several days. Terran described each event in exact order, resisting the temptation to draw conclusions unsupported by evidence. He recounted the abandoned settlements, the ruined temple, Keelan's testimony, the mysterious woman, and finally placed the ancient Republic medallion upon the table. Captain Sewell remained silent throughout, watching the Grand Master carefully in hopes that some visible reaction might reveal whether the mystery had finally become understandable. None came. Yoda simply listened, asking short questions whenever a detail required clarification. When Terran finished, Yoda picked up the scarred medallion between 3 small fingers. He rotated it slowly beneath the overhead light, studying every deliberate scratch carved across the Jedi emblem. For several long moments, the room remained silent except for the soft buzz of recording equipment. Then Yoda's expression changed almost imperceptibly, not with fear, but with recognition buried beneath centuries of memory. "Old," he said quietly, "very old, before your lifetime, before your master's lifetime." He traced the damaged Republic crest with one claw. Such medallions, given they were, to those who served the Order in dangerous places. Captain Saul exchanged a puzzled glance with Terran. "Served the Jedi?" the captain asked carefully. "You mean they were Jedi?" Yoda shook his head. "No. Helpers they were. Scouts, guides, families who watched distant worlds where few Jedi could remain." He placed the medallion back upon the table with unusual care. "Trusted they were, forgotten they became." The final words carried a weight that drew every eye in the room toward him. Even Terran sensed there was more hidden beneath the answer than the Grand Master wished to reveal before certainty replaced suspicion. Keelan entered the operations room moments later after one of the station attendants announced that the boy had awakened. Fresh clothing had replaced his torn garments, though exhaustion still lingered in his pale face. The moment he noticed Yoda, uncertainty flickered across his features. He had expected another human Jedi like Terran, not the ancient master whose reputation had spread even to remote frontier settlements. Yoda offered a gentle smile and beckoned him closer without speaking. The invitation alone eased much of the boy's nervousness. "You escaped," Yoda said once Keelan stood beside him. "Strong, your instincts are." The boy nodded hesitantly before glancing toward Terran for reassurance. "I hid," he admitted. "I wasn't brave." Yoda chuckled softly, the sound carrying surprising warmth despite the grim surroundings. "Bravery, hiding, is sometimes. Living tells the story. Dead heroes, few questions answer." Keelan looked down at the floor before describing the night of the abduction once again, this time under the Grand Master's attentive gaze. Yoda interrupted only once. "The words?" he asked. "Exactly remember them, do you?" Keelan closed his eyes briefly. "Not this one. His blood is silent." Those were the words. The room fell quiet after the boy finished speaking. Yoda folded his hands within his sleeves and closed his eyes for several seconds, listening not merely to the testimony but to the truth carried beneath it through the Force. At last he opened them again. "Chosen the victims are," he said. "Not chance, not convenience, bloodlines they seek." Terran nodded slowly. "I reached the same conclusion, Master." Yoda regarded him thoughtfully. "Perhaps. But why blood? That answer we do not yet have." Before further discussion could continue, an alarm sounded from the communications console. One of the operators hurried to the display, his face tightening almost immediately. "Another settlement has gone silent," he reported. Hillcrest Ridge. Their emergency beacon activated automatically after losing contact with every local transmitter. Captain Soul swore under his breath and reached for his field jacket. Hillcrest Ridge lay nearly 80 kilometers north of the outpost, isolated by dense woodland and difficult terrain. Under normal conditions, ground transport would require most of a day. Yoda turned toward Terran without hesitation. "Go now," he said. "Lose more time. We cannot." Minutes later, the Jedi courier lifted from the landing platform carrying Yoda, Terran, Keelan, and a small emergency team, while Captain Soul organized militia reinforcements to follow overland. The sleek vessel skimmed low above the forest canopy, weaving between mountain peaks to avoid violent storm fronts building once again across the horizon. Through the cockpit transparisteel, endless green stretched in every direction. Yet beneath that tranquil sea of leaves, entire communities had begun disappearing without leaving a single ordinary explanation behind. The flight lasted less than 30 minutes. As the courier approached Hillcrest Ridge, silence greeted them before visual confirmation ever did. No transport traffic moved above the settlement. No smoke rose from cooking fires, despite the late morning hour. Even the small wind turbines standing along the nearby hills had stopped turning, though the surrounding treetops bent beneath a steady breeze. The pilot exchanged an uneasy glance with Terran before lowering the vessel toward the central square. Something had interrupted normal life with terrifying precision. The landing ramp descended into complete stillness. Yoda stepped onto the empty street first, his ears twitching slightly as he listened to the unnatural quiet surrounding the village. Doors remained open exactly as they had in every previous settlement. Market stalls displayed untouched produce. Laundry hung drying between homes where no families remained to collect it. A domestic droid rolled slowly across the square, repeating the same unfinished sentence in a cheerful tone. "Good morning, citizens. Today's harvest schedule has..." The machine continued, speaking to no one until its fading power cells finally silenced it. Terran moved carefully between the deserted buildings while Yoda paused in the center of the square, leaning upon his cane with eyes half closed. Unlike his younger companion, he did not search for footprints or physical evidence first. Instead, he reached into the Force with extraordinary patience, allowing every living current around him to settle naturally before touching the deeper disturbance beneath. Birds circled high above the rooftops. Rodents hid beneath storage sheds. The forests breathed with ancient life. Then beneath all of it, he felt the wound. His eyes opened sharply. "They watch us," Yoda said. Terran instinctively reached for his lightsaber. "Where?" he asked, turning toward the surrounding rooftops. Yoda slowly lifted one clawed hand toward the dense forest surrounding the settlement. "Not here," he replied. "There." His expression remained composed, yet something rare had entered his voice. It was not fear, it was certainty. Already, he continued quietly, expected we were. Yoda did not move immediately after speaking. He stood in the center of the deserted settlement while a cool wind carried the scent of wet timber and freshly turned earth through the empty streets. Around him, abandoned homes creaked softly as their wooden frames settled, and somewhere beyond the tree line, a lone branch snapped beneath unseen weight. Terran remained alert with one hand resting upon his lightsaber, his eyes searching rooftops, alleys, and windows for the slightest movement. Nothing revealed itself. Whoever had orchestrated the disappearances possessed remarkable discipline, refusing even the smallest mistake that might betray their position. The Grand Master slowly knelt, placing one hand against the packed earth of the village square. His eyes closed once more, and for several long breaths, he remained completely still. Terran had witnessed experienced Jedi Masters meditate before, yet there was something profoundly different about Yoda's communion with the Force. He did not force his awareness outward in search of answers. Instead, he allowed the world itself to speak, listening with patient humility until hidden currents gradually emerged from the silence. At last, he opened his eyes again and looked toward the northern edge of the settlement. "Afraid they were," he said softly. "Confused, taken quickly, but fought. Some did." Without another word, he began walking toward a narrow lane between two storage buildings. Terran followed, trusting instincts refined over 8 centuries of service to the Order. The lane ended beside a collapsed fence where churned mud revealed signs of violent struggle almost invisible beneath the previous night's rain. Broken planks lay scattered across the ground, and several deep impressions suggested that multiple people had been forced to their knees. Yoda studied the disturbed earth in silence before reaching down to lift something partially buried beneath the mud. It was a child's bracelet woven from Blue River reeds, snapped cleanly in half. Terran examined the surrounding area while Yoda held the bracelet carefully in his palm. The militia missed these tracks, he observed. Several narrow footprints led away from the settlement before disappearing into thicker undergrowth beyond the fields. Unlike earlier trails, these had not vanished abruptly. Whoever left them had made little effort to conceal their passage. "Deliberate," Yoda murmured. "Want us to follow, they do?" Terran frowned. "A trap?" The Grand Master nodded once. "Likely, but answers traps sometimes contain." Keelan, who had remained aboard the courier under the supervision of the pilot, suddenly appeared at the edge of the square, despite strict instructions to stay inside. He hurried toward the 2 Jedi, breathing hard after running across the settlement. "Master Terran," he called, stopping several paces away. "I remembered something." Terran's concern at the boy's disobedience faded as he recognized genuine urgency in his voice. "When they came to our village," Keelan continued, struggling to organize his thoughts, "one of them wasn't wearing black robes. He had dark red armor beneath his cloak. I thought it was leather, but it looked old. Really old." Yoda regarded the boy thoughtfully. "Symbols upon it, see you did?" Keelan hesitated before nodding. "Yes, gold lines across the chest, like branches growing from a tree." Terran immediately retrieved his datapad and displayed photographs taken inside the ruined temple. Keelan pointed almost instantly toward one of the carved reliefs depicting ancient figures gathered around the stone basin. "There," he said quietly. "That's the same pattern." A heavy silence settled over the group. The connection between the kidnappers and the forgotten temple was no longer speculation. The narrow trail led northward through increasingly rugged terrain, where towering cliffs squeezed the forest into winding corridors of stone and shadow. Giant ferns brushed against the travelers as they advanced, and streams crossed the path often enough to erase clear footprints. Yoda walked without apparent effort despite his age, using his cane more as balance than support, while carefully observing every change in the landscape. Several times he paused beside weathered standing stones, half consumed by moss, each bearing faint carvings almost identical to the crimson symbols found near the abandoned settlements. None had been painted recently. These markers had stood untouched for centuries. Hours passed before the forest finally opened into a broad valley unlike any Terran had explored during his years on the planet. Massive terraces carved directly into the mountainside overlooked fertile ground where rows of ancient fruit trees still grew in orderly patterns despite generations without cultivation. Crumbling irrigation channels stretched across the valley floor, and fragments of collapsed buildings emerged from thick vegetation like forgotten monuments. This had once been no simple village. It had been the center of a thriving civilization whose existence had vanished almost entirely from recorded history. Yoda surveyed the valley without speaking. The force flowed differently here. Instead of the concealed emptiness haunting the surrounding forests, the ancient settlement echoed with countless traces of ordinary life long since past. Children had played among these terraces. Families had worked the orchards. Craftsmen had shaped stone beneath open skies while generations lived and died in peace. The memories were faint, worn smooth by time, yet they remained. Then, beneath those quiet echoes, Yoda sensed another layer. Someone had returned to this forgotten place not merely to occupy it, but to awaken something deliberately preserved beneath its ruins. They descended cautiously toward the abandoned structures, moving from cover to cover while Terran scanned each building with handheld sensors. No life signs appeared beyond birds nesting among broken rooftops and small animals darting through fallen walls. Even so, neither Jedi allowed the deceptive calm to lower their guard. At the center of the valley stood a circular hall larger than the ruined temple they had previously explored. Unlike the surrounding buildings, this structure remained almost entirely intact. Fresh repairs blended seamlessly with ancient stonework, and faint smoke drifted from narrow vents concealed near its roof. Terran exchanged a brief glance with Yoda before they approached the entrance. Massive doors of dark stone stood partially open, revealing only darkness beyond. There were no guards, no visible defenses, no sign that anyone expected visitors. The absence itself became the warning. Terran reached instinctively toward the Force, searching for hidden minds inside the structure. Once again, he encountered only that impossible void where living presences should have been. It was as though an entire building full of people had learned to leave no reflection within the Force at all. Yoda stopped several steps before the threshold. His expression remained calm, but his ears lowered slightly as he studied the darkness ahead. "Listen," he said. At first, Terran heard nothing beyond distant wind moving through abandoned orchards. Then, faintly, another sound emerged from deep inside the hall. It was not chanting, not machinery. It resembled dozens of quiet voices speaking in perfect unison, each too soft to distinguish from the others. The words blended together into a low, rhythmic murmur that seemed to pulse with unnatural regularity. Keelan's face turned pale the instant he heard it. He stepped backward, without realizing he had moved. "They sang that," the boy whispered, "every night, after they took everyone." Before either Jedi could respond, the enormous stone doors began to swing shut on their own with slow, deliberate purpose. The stone doors moved with ponderous certainty, grinding against ancient tracks hidden beneath centuries of dust. Terran reacted instantly, driving himself forward with the Force as his green lightsaber burst to life in a flash of emerald light. The blade slid between the narrowing doors, halting them for only a heartbeat before hidden mechanisms continued forcing the immense slabs together. Yoda did not rush. He simply raised one small hand, and the pressure against the doors seemed to falter as invisible power met ancient engineering. "Inside," he said calmly, "quickly." Terran ushered Keelan through the opening first, then slipped inside beside the Grand Master as the doors finally thundered shut behind them. Darkness swallowed the entrance hall until narrow channels cut into the walls flickered to life with pale blue flame. The cold light spread slowly from one brazier to the next, revealing a circular chamber supported by towering columns carved with figures whose faces had been deliberately chiseled away. Dust floated lazily through the air, carrying the faint scent of damp stone mixed with something metallic that reminded Terran of old blood. The whispering voices continued somewhere deeper within the structure, rising and falling with unsettling rhythm. They were unmistakably human, yet no single voice could be separated from the chorus. Even the chamber's remarkable acoustics failed to reveal their exact source. Keelan instinctively moved closer to Terran, his eyes fixed upon the nearest column. "They brought us somewhere like this," he whispered. "Not here, but somewhere with the same lights." His breathing quickened despite every effort to remain calm. "They made everyone walk without speaking. If someone cried..." The boy stopped abruptly, swallowing hard as the memory caught in his throat. Terran rested a reassuring hand upon his shoulder. "You do not have to remember everything at once," he said gently. "Only what helps us find the others." Keelan nodded, grateful for the permission to leave certain horrors unspoken. Yoda slowly circled the chamber, examining the carved pillars with patient attention. Unlike the ruined temple, these reliefs had survived almost untouched. They depicted families standing together beneath unfamiliar constellations while elders placed their hands upon the heads of young children. Streams flowed from bowls into the earth, and from that earth rose branching trees whose roots intertwined beneath every figure. There were no scenes of conquest, sacrifice, or war. Instead, the carvings spoke of inheritance, community, and continuity. Yet someone had recently painted narrow crimson lines across many of the ancient images, altering their meaning without completely erasing the original work. Terran approached one of the untouched carvings and brushed loose dust from a weathered inscription beneath it. "This isn't written in any Republic language," he observed quietly, "nor any script I've studied in the archives." Yoda joined him, studying the faded symbols for several moments before answering. Older than the Republic, perhaps. Older than the Jedi Order some worlds are. His fingers traced the worn grooves without disturbing them. Forgotten civilizations become. Their mistakes often do not. The Grand Master's voice carried no mystery for its own sake. It was simply the hard truth of history repeated across countless generations. The whispering suddenly stopped. Silence settled over the hall with such completeness that the absence of sound became almost physical. Terran's grip tightened around his lightsaber as every instinct warned him that the true danger had only now begun. Then a single clear voice echoed through the chamber, neither loud nor strained, yet perfectly audible from every direction at once. "Grand Master Yoda," it said, "you accepted our invitation more quickly than expected." The voice belonged to an elderly man, cultured and controlled, carrying the confidence of someone speaking from complete security. "Reveal yourself," Terran called, stepping slightly ahead of Keelan. A quiet laugh echoed through the circular chamber. "In time," the unseen speaker replied. "You have spent days chasing footprints while standing inside the story itself. Why hurry now?" The blue flames brightened together, illuminating a narrow passage that neither Jedi had noticed upon entering. Its doorway had been concealed within the carvings until the shifting light exposed subtle seams in the stone. "Walk forward," the voice continued. "You seek answers. I seek witnesses. Today, perhaps both desires may be satisfied." Terran glanced toward Yoda, awaiting instruction rather than acting upon impulse. The Grand Master remained thoughtful for several breaths before giving the slightest nod. "Go," he said quietly, carefully. They entered the newly revealed corridor, finding its walls smoother than those of the outer hall, their polished stone reflecting the cold blue light with mirror-like clarity. The whispering voices had vanished completely now, replaced by the distant sound of flowing water somewhere beneath the structure. Their footsteps echoed softly through the narrow passage, though every echo seemed strangely delayed, returning a fraction later than expected. The corridor opened into a vast underground gallery, unlike anything the explorers had anticipated. An immense natural cavern stretched beyond the worked stone, its ceiling disappearing into darkness far above, while slender waterfalls descended from hidden cracks in the rock. Ancient bridges crossed pools of perfectly still water whose surfaces reflected the blue flames lining the walls. At the cavern's center stood a circular platform surrounded by 12 stone pillars. Upon each pillar rested a transparent crystal cylinder, illuminated from below by pale white light. Terran's expression hardened as he realized what filled the cylinders. Each contained a child. Some appeared no older than 6. Others were entering adolescence. All remained suspended in peaceful unconsciousness, untouched by visible injury, breathing slowly behind the transparent walls. Simple white garments had replaced their ordinary clothing, and faint crimson markings circled each cylinder near its base. Keelan gasped, instantly recognizing several familiar faces from neighboring settlements. He started forward before Terran caught his arm. "Wait," the Jedi warned quietly. "Something is wrong." Yoda had already sensed it. He approached the nearest cylinder with measured steps, studying the sleeping child within. The force flowed around every captive normally. They were alive, unharmed, Yet each child's presence seemed wrapped inside a delicate veil that neither suppressed nor corrupted it. Instead, the veil concealed it from outside perception, much as the kidnappers themselves had hidden from Jedi awareness. Whoever had created this technique possessed remarkable understanding of the Force, despite leaving behind none of the violent scars usually associated with dark side practices. "You see?" the unseen voice asked. A figure emerged at last from the shadows beyond the central platform. He was tall, his hair silver with age, his face lined by decades rather than battle. Dark crimson robes fell neatly around polished armor engraved with branching golden patterns, exactly as Keelan had described. No weapon hung at his belt. His hands remained folded behind his back while he regarded Yoda with composed respect rather than hatred. When he finally bowed, the gesture was formal, almost courtly. "It has been many generations," he said. "Welcome, at last, to the House of Memory." For several long moments no one spoke. Water continued to fall from the cavern ceiling in narrow silver streams, striking the still pools below, with soft rhythmic echoes that seemed almost ceremonial. The elderly man remained where he stood, neither advancing nor retreating, his posture straight, despite the weight of years resting upon his shoulders. His calm, unsettled Terran, more than open hostility would have done. Every criminal the Jedi had ever questioned displayed some mixture of fear, arrogance, or desperation. This man displayed only patience, as though the arrival of the Jedi fulfilled a plan set in motion long before any of them had been born. Yoda regarded him steadily. "Know you I do not," he said, "yet know the order you clearly do." The old man inclined his head. "My name is Sarad Voss. It will not appear in your archives, nor in the records of the Republic." His voice carried the measured cadence of an accomplished teacher rather than a zealot. "My ancestor served the Jedi faithfully when this region lay beyond the Republic's permanent reach. They guided your knights across these forests, sheltered them through wars, and protected those who could not protect themselves." He allowed the silence to linger before adding quietly, "When the frontier changed, the Jedi departed. We did not." Terran studied the man carefully, searching for deception in his face. "That does not explain the disappearances," he said, "nor why innocent people have been taken from their homes." Sarad's expression hardened slightly, though not with anger. "Innocence is often claimed by those who inherit comfortable histories," he replied. "The families you seek are descendants of those entrusted with an ancient responsibility. Most never knew it themselves. Time buried the truth beneath ordinary lives." His gaze shifted briefly toward the sleeping children within the crystal cylinders. "Blood remembers, even when memory does not." Yoda slowly walked around the nearest cylinder, his reflection rippling across its transparent surface. The child inside remained peacefully asleep, breathing with slow regularity. "Harmed they are not," he observed. Sarad nodded. "No. Every child has been fed, treated, and protected since arriving here." Terran frowned. "Against their will?" "Yes," Sarad answered without hesitation. "That burden belongs to me. But had we asked politely, would you have allowed us to gather them?" The question hung unanswered, because everyone present already knew the answer. Keelan stared at the unconscious children with growing disbelief. He recognized classmates, neighbors, and even a girl whose family had shared harvest festivals, with his own every year. They looked peaceful, untouched by violence, yet they had been stolen from the world without choice or explanation. "Wake them up," he pleaded, taking an uncertain step forward. "Please, just let them go home." Sarad looked at the boy for several seconds before speaking. "If I release them today, they will be hunted tomorrow." His voice remained calm, but for the first time sorrow crept into it. "You think I imprisoned them. In truth, I hid them." Terran's lightsaber remained ignited, its emerald glow reflecting across the polished stone floor. "From whom?" he demanded. Sarad did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned toward one of the cavern walls, where an enormous relief had been carved directly into the rock. Unlike the peaceful scenes in the outer chambers, this carving depicted fire-consuming villages while armored warriors defended frightened civilians. Several figures wore robes unmistakably resembling those of ancient Jedi, though time had worn away many details. At the center stood a circle of ordinary settlers shielding children behind them, while dark cloaked attackers closed from every side. "This," Sarad said quietly, "is what your archives forgot." Yoda approached the relief with slow, deliberate steps. His ancient eyes lingered upon weathered details almost erased by the passing centuries. "Forgotten," he repeated softly. "Or lost." Sarad shook his head. "There is a difference." He extended one hand toward the carving. "Nearly 600 years ago, this world became a refuge during a border conflict that never reached the core worlds. Jedi Knights escorted families carrying records, relics, and bloodlines entrusted to their protection. They believed the danger had passed. It had not. His fingers curled into a loose fist. When reinforcements failed to arrive, the settlers remained alone. Terran listened carefully, measuring each statement against what little he knew of Republic frontier history. Records from that era were incomplete. Entire sectors had changed allegiance, and countless colonies had vanished during regional wars, too small to earn lasting attention in the core. "You blame the Jedi for abandoning your people," he said. Sarad met his gaze without hesitation. "No, I blame history for forgetting us." He spoke the words without bitterness, making them somehow more unsettling. "My ancestors waited generations for the order to return. Eventually they accepted that no one was coming. The old man led them slowly around the circular platform, never attempting to flee despite standing within easy reach of Terran's blade. The children you see here descend from those original guardians," he explained. "Our families intermarried across centuries, traditions faded, languages disappeared, only fragments remained." He stopped beside a weathered stone pedestal supporting several ancient scroll cases sealed with brittle wax. But one inheritance endured. Certain bloodlines carried an unusual sensitivity, not enough to become Jedi in most cases, enough to preserve something entrusted to them. His eyes settled upon Yoda. "Something your order itself asked them to protect." Yoda's ears lowered almost imperceptibly. "Evidence," he said. "Need evidence, we do." Sarad nodded once. "You shall have it." He broke the ancient wax seal upon one of the scroll cases and withdrew a tightly rolled sheet unlike any modern parchment. Its surface shimmered faintly, woven from some durable fiber that had resisted centuries of decay. With remarkable care, he spread it across the stone pedestal. Faded ink covered the document in elegant script surrounding the unmistakable seal of the Jedi Order as it had appeared hundreds of years earlier. Terran stepped closer, his heartbeat quickening. At the bottom of the document rested dozens of signatures, nearly all unfamiliar to him. One, however, remained perfectly legible despite its age. Master Yoda. Silence settled over the cavern. The Grand Master studied the signature for a long time before speaking. I remember this mission. His quiet words carried no uncertainty, only regret. No one spoke after Yoda's words. Even the constant murmur of falling water seemed to fade beneath the weight of that simple admission. Terran turned slowly toward the Grand Master, struggling to reconcile the calm figure before him with a mission that had vanished almost entirely from the Jedi archives. Sarad Voss watched Yoda closely, not with triumph, but with quiet expectation, as though he had waited his entire life for this single moment. Keelan remained near the crystal cylinders, looking from one adult to another without understanding why an old document could carry such power. The cavern itself seemed to hold its breath. Yoda stepped closer to the ancient parchment until his small hand rested lightly upon its edge. Time had faded much of the writing, yet enough remained to awaken memories buried beneath centuries of service. Young I was not, he said softly, but younger than now, yes. Border worlds burned then. Many refugees there were. His gaze lingered on the weathered seal of the Jedi Order. Protect certain families, our task became. Carry knowledge, they did. Maps, records, lineages. Dangerous if fallen into wrong hands. His expression grew distant as scattered recollections slowly returned. Safe? Believed we had made them? Sarad inclined his head respectfully. You kept your promise for a time. The attacks ended, the Republic expanded, and the frontier became peaceful. He slowly folded his hands behind his back once more. The Council recalled its watchmen one by one as other crises demanded attention. Generations passed, we adapted. We survived alone. He paused beside one of the crystal chambers, his reflection wavering across its transparent surface. Then 30 years ago, strangers arrived asking questions no outsider should have known to ask. Terran narrowed his eyes. Who were they? We never learned their true names. Sarad's voice remained steady, though a shadow crossed his features. They claimed to be scholars, studying forgotten settlements. They purchased old family records, visited abandoned shrines, and copied inscriptions from temples hidden deep within these forests. He looked toward the carved reliefs lining the cavern walls. Several of our elders became suspicious. One disappeared, then another. Soon entire households vanished without explanation. His eyes hardened for the first time since the Jedi had entered the House of Memory. That was when we understood someone else had begun searching for what our ancestors were entrusted to hide. Yoda listened without interrupting. The pieces no longer seemed isolated. They formed a pattern stretching across decades, perhaps longer. Know who sent them, you do not, he observed. No. Sarad shook his head slowly. But we learned enough. He crossed the chamber toward an alcove where several ancient star charts had been carved directly into polished black stone. Unlike the artistic reliefs outside, these markings possessed mathematical precision. Constellations, hyperspace vectors, and planetary alignments intersected with remarkable accuracy despite their age. At the center rested a single system highlighted by concentric circles, unlike any neighboring region. Our ancestors were never protecting treasure, Sarad explained, nor weapons. They protected knowledge of a place. Terran studied the chart carefully. I don't recognize these coordinates. You shouldn't. Sarad traced one engraved line with his finger. The roots no longer exist. Yoda's expression remained unreadable, but Terran sensed the force gathering quietly around the Grand Master as forgotten memories continued surfacing. A sanctuary, Yoda said at last. Sarad nodded. Yes. He turned toward the sleeping children once again. The bloodlines carried more than tradition. They carried fragments of navigational memory passed from generation to generation through stories, songs, and family rituals that gradually lost their original meaning. He smiled sadly. Parents believed they were teaching harmless customs. In truth, they preserved pieces of a map no single family possessed alone. His gaze swept across the crystal chambers. Only together could the pattern be completed. Keelan frowned, trying to understand. My father used to make me memorize old songs, he said quietly. He said our family had always sung them. So did mine, Sarad replied. So did all of ours. Terran felt a cold realization settle into place. That's why you chose specific families. Exactly. We gathered those whose bloodlines still carried the fragments. He looked directly at the Jedi Knight. If even one family disappeared into the hands of those hunting us, the map would begin falling into the wrong hands. Terran lowered his lightsaber slightly, though he did not extinguish it. You still kidnapped them. I did. Sarad accepted the accusation without defense. And I will answer for that when this is over. Before anyone could speak again, a deep metallic vibration rolled through the cavern floor. It was subtle at first, almost mistaken for distant thunder, yet it repeated several seconds later with greater force. Fine dust drifted from the ceiling. Ripples spread across the perfectly still pools surrounding the central platform. Every crystal cylinder emitted a faint pulse of pale light before settling once more into silence. Sarad's face changed instantly. They found us. Terran looked toward the entrance passage. You said no one knew this place existed. I said we hid it. Another impact echoed through the mountain. This one was unmistakably mechanical. Stone cracked somewhere far above, followed by the muffled roar of collapsing masonry. Yoda lifted his head slightly, listening beyond ordinary hearing. Explosives, he said. Small charges, opening another way in. Sarad moved quickly to a nearby control pedestal, pressing his palm against a smooth section of carved stone. Ancient mechanisms awakened throughout the cavern. Hidden doors sealed with heavy grinding sounds, bridges slowly retracted across several pools, and narrow defensive barriers emerged from the floor around the sleeping children. They've never reached this chamber before, Sarad said, his calm voice edged now with urgency. Who are they? Terran demanded. Before Sarad could answer, the lights within the cavern flickered. Not from failing power, from interruption. One by one, the blue flames extinguished themselves until only the pale glow surrounding the crystal cylinders remained. Darkness swallowed the outer edges of the chamber. Then a new voice echoed through the cavern. Unlike Sarad's measured tone, this one carried quiet amusement. You spent generations hiding from ghosts. The unseen speaker laughed softly. And never noticed that we were already inside your walls. The laughter faded into the darkness, leaving behind only the distant rush of waterfalls and the slow pulse of the crystal cylinders surrounding the sleeping children. Terran pivoted toward the sound, his lightsaber casting emerald reflections across the cavern floor, but the darkness beyond the pillars revealed nothing. Every instinct urged him to strike first, yet there was no visible enemy to confront. Yoda remained motionless, his eyes half closed, as he listened through the Force rather than with his ears. Sarad's hand rested upon the ancient control pedestal, his calm composure finally giving way to genuine alarm. Whatever voice had spoken did not belong to anyone he had expected. "You know this person," Yoda said quietly. Sarad hesitated. "I know the voice." His answer came little more than a whisper. I believed him dead. A figure stepped into the pale light beyond the nearest pillar, not concealed by robes, but dressed in practical gray clothing reinforced with dark armor beneath a long, weatherproof cloak. He appeared no older than 50, with close-cropped black hair streaked lightly with silver and sharp features, untouched by hesitation. Unlike Sarad's ceremonial attire, everything about him suggested movement rather than tradition. A compact blaster rested openly at his side, though his hand remained far from its grip. He smiled with unsettling ease, as though greeting old acquaintances after a lengthy journey. "You disappoint me, Sarad," he said. "After all these years, you still mistake silence for safety." Sarad stared at him in disbelief. Davian. Or the name escaped before he seemed aware he had spoken it. "You survived." The newcomer spread his hands almost playfully. "Barely." His smile widened. "You left me beneath a collapsing sanctuary with enough explosives to bury an army. I considered it rather personal." Terran shifted his attention between the two men. "Who is he?" he asked without lowering his weapon. Sarad answered without taking his eyes from the stranger. "My younger brother." Silence returned for only a heartbeat before the implications settled over the cavern. Keelan looked from one brother to the other, struggling to understand how men sharing the same blood could stand on opposite sides of such a conflict. Yoda's expression remained unreadable, though his gaze lingered upon Davian with careful attention. The force around the newcomer felt unusual. He was neither hidden from it as completely as the hooded kidnappers, nor openly immersed within it like a Jedi. Instead, his presence flickered, appearing and disappearing in irregular pulses, as though another will repeatedly drew a veil across his existence. Davian took several leisurely steps forward, stopping beyond the reach of Terran's lightsaber. "You always clung to the old promises," he said to his brother. "Guard the bloodlines, preserve the map, wait faithfully for Jedi who would never return." His voice carried neither hatred nor bitterness now. It held only quiet certainty. "I waited beside you for many years before accepting the obvious truth. We were abandoned because what we protected mattered more than the people protecting it." He glanced briefly toward Yoda. "No offense intended, Grandmaster. Institutions rarely remember every sacrifice made in their name." Yoda met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps The simple acknowledgement caught Davian off guard for the briefest instant, but forgotten excuse betrayal does not. Davian's smile returned. Betrayal depends entirely upon which story survives. He turned toward the sleeping children encased within the crystal chambers. My brother believes these bloodlines must remain hidden forever. I disagree. Knowledge locked away eventually rots. Secrets become prisons. He walked slowly around one of the cylinders, resting his fingertips against the transparent surface. Others share my opinion. They possess resources, ships, scholars, and patience far beyond anything this little sanctuary could hope to resist. Terran's eyes narrowed. The scholars who began hunting the bloodlines. They were never scholars. Davian chuckled softly. They simply found the disguise useful. He paused, studying the unconscious child before continuing. They serve patrons who understand the value of forgotten history. Names, Terran demanded. Give us names. Davian regarded him almost sympathetically. If I knew them, Jedi, I would already be dead. The cavern trembled again, this time with far greater violence. Stone fragments rained from the ceiling as a distant explosion echoed through the mountain. One of the sealed passages behind Sarad cracked visibly from floor to archway, thin lines spreading through the ancient masonry like veins beneath skin. Hidden mechanisms groaned under tremendous strain. Somewhere beyond the walls came the unmistakable sound of blaster fire, followed by brief, desperate shouting. They've breached the upper chambers, Sarad said. His face had become grim. The Guardians won't hold them long. Yoda turned sharply toward him. Guardians? Sarad nodded. Our people remained above. Terran felt a surge of anger. You left civilians to defend this place? They insisted. Sarad's reply came without pride. They have protected these halls for generations. Another explosion interrupted him, much closer than before. The chamber's blue defensive barriers flickered uncertainly around the crystal cylinders. Davian looked upward as dust drifted through shafts of pale light. They're making excellent progress. His tone remained almost conversational. You invited them here, Sarad said. I showed them where to search. Davian corrected him gently. There is a difference. He met his brother's horrified gaze. I never intended them to reach the children. For the first time, uncertainty entered his voice. They promised they needed only the map. Yoda studied him carefully. Promises from shadows. Davian lowered his eyes. A costly lesson. The wall opposite the main entrance suddenly shattered inward. Ancient stone burst across the chamber in a cloud of dust as armored figures advanced through the breach with disciplined precision. Their armor was matte black from head to toe, devoid of insignia or decoration, their helmets concealing every trace of identity behind narrow crimson visors. Compact blaster carbines swept the chamber in practiced arcs, while several soldiers immediately established firing positions without a word. Behind them rolled two small floating machines projecting shimmering fields that distorted the surrounding air. Terran ignited his lightsaber fully, stepping between the attackers and the sleeping children. Yoda moved beside him without haste. The lead soldier raised one gloved hand. No unnecessary casualties, he ordered calmly. His voice emerged electronically distorted by the helmet. Secure the bloodline subjects. He looked directly toward Yoda. if the Jedi interfere. No, the sentence never finished. The Grand Master had already leaped. For an instant, his small form became nothing more than a green blur crossing the cavern, his lightsaber igniting in midair with a brilliant emerald flash that illuminated every corner of the ancient chamber. The battle had begun. Yoda landed among the leading attackers with astonishing speed, his green lightsaber describing a brilliant arc that deflected the first volley of blaster fire back toward the cavern wall. Sparks exploded from shattered stone as disciplined formations dissolved into sudden confusion. The black-armored soldiers recovered almost instantly, separating into smaller squads that moved with remarkable coordination instead of panicked retreat. They had trained to face dangerous opponents before. Even so, none of them had anticipated confronting the Grand Master of the Jedi Order in person. The brief hesitation proved costly. Yoda struck with precise economy, disabling weapons, severing armor joints, and sending opponents crashing harmlessly across the stone floor without taking a single life. Terran moved in perfect rhythm with his master, intercepting a second wave, attempting to flank the crystal chambers. Blaster bolts flashed through the dim cavern like streaks of molten light, each one turning aside beneath the sweeping movements of his lightsaber. One soldier drew a vibroblade and charged at close range, while another fired from behind, expecting divided attention to create an opening. Terran pivoted between them, knocking the blade aside before redirecting the blaster shot into the attacker's weapon. Metal burst apart in a shower of glowing fragments. The remaining soldiers adjusted immediately, abandoning individual attacks in favor of suppressing fire designed to pin the Jedi away from the sleeping children. Sarad rushed toward the nearest control pedestal as alarms echoed through hidden passages beneath the sanctuary. Ancient mechanisms responded sluggishly to his commands, centuries-old systems straining under repeated explosions from above. Stone barriers rose around the central platform, though several stalled halfway before grinding to a halt. "The lower seals are failing," he shouted over the growing roar of battle. "If they reach the central archive, every safeguard our ancestors built will collapse." Keelan remained close beside him, carrying spare power cells from one damaged console to another despite the danger. Fear still gripped the boy, but purpose had begun pushing it aside. The floating machines accompanying the attackers drifted forward through the chaos, their shimmering fields expanding until they enveloped sections of the cavern in faintly distorted light. Terran immediately sensed something unusual. The force itself did not weaken, yet its perception became strangely blurred within those fields, making the movement of nearby enemies harder to anticipate. They were not true force-nullifying devices. Instead, they interfered with instinct, creating fleeting uncertainty where Jedi reflexes normally flowed without interruption. "Master," Terran called while deflecting another burst of blaster fire. "Those machines are affecting our awareness." Yoda glanced briefly toward the hovering projectors. "Destroy them," he replied. "Blind us they seek." Before Terran could advance, Davian stepped directly into the path of one of the machines. He raised his empty hands toward the soldiers rather than the Jedi. "Stop!" he shouted. "This was not our agreement." The lead commander ignored him completely. Davian advanced another step, desperation replacing the confidence he had displayed. only minutes before. You promised no harm would come to the children. The commander's helmet turned slowly toward him. Your usefulness has concluded, the distorted voice answered. Stand aside. Recognition finally broke through Davian's lingering denial. He looked from the silent soldiers to the crystal chambers, then toward his brother standing beside the damaged controls. Years of conviction collapsed within a heartbeat. Without another word, he drew the compact blaster from his belt and fired, not at the Jedi, but at the nearest hovering projector. The machine erupted in a burst of blue sparks, its distortion field collapsing instantly. Several soldiers wheeled toward him in surprise. Davian did not hesitate. He threw himself behind a fallen pillar as blaster fire carved glowing scars across the stone where he had stood. Sarad stared at his brother in disbelief. Every instinct urged him to distrust the sudden change, yet the evidence unfolded before his eyes. Davian crawled across broken masonry toward a second projector, firing controlled bursts whenever an opportunity appeared. Cover him, Terran shouted, recognizing that destroying the remaining devices had become essential. Sarad hesitated only an instant before leaving the control pedestal. He seized an abandoned blaster carbine from one of the unconscious attackers and joined the fight beside the brother he had believed lost decades earlier. Neither spoke. There would be time for words, only if they survived. The battle spread across the vast cavern as disciplined formations gave way to desperate close-quarters combat. Water splashed across polished stone, while blaster bolts ricocheted from ancient pillars, bearing scars untouched for centuries. Yoda moved with impossible agility through the confusion, each leap carrying him exactly where the defenders needed him most. He disabled another squad, attempting to breach the protective barriers around the children before turning his attention toward the heavily armored commander. Unlike the others, the commander never fired recklessly. He observed, calculated, waited. His restraint suggested confidence in something yet to come. Then the commander pressed a control mounted beneath his armored wrist. A low mechanical hum spread through the cavern. Every crystal cylinder began glowing deep crimson. Keelan froze. The children! Inside the transparent chambers, the sleeping captives stirred for the first time. Their peaceful expressions tightened into visible discomfort as crimson light pulsed beneath them in slow, synchronized waves. Ancient symbols carved around each cylinder awakened one after another, filling the cavern with an ominous red radiance that reflected across the underground pools like flowing blood. Sarad rushed back toward the central controls, desperately entering override sequences from memory, but every command returned the same result. Someone had seized authority over the sanctuary's systems. Yoda felt the disturbance immediately. "This is not their technology," he said. "No," Sarad answered, panic rising despite every effort to suppress it. "These mechanisms were never built to do this." The commander finally spoke again, his electronically altered voice carrying across the chamber with cold certainty. "Thank you for preserving them." He slowly removed a small black device from a compartment within his armor. "The map is no longer required." He activated it. The crimson light surrounding the children intensified. One by one, every unconscious child opened their eyes at exactly the same moment. None of them blinked. None of them spoke. Instead, they all turned their heads together, and looked directly at Yoda. The crimson light filled the cavern, with an unnatural glow washing ancient stone and falling water in shades of deep scarlet. Every child remained suspended within the crystal chambers, their eyes open yet strangely unfocused, as though gazing beyond the walls surrounding them. Terran felt a sharp chill race through him. The Force still flowed around the children with perfect clarity, untouched by corruption, but something had reached into their minds and drawn them into a single, silent rhythm. It was neither possession nor the domination practiced by the Sith. Instead, it resembled countless minds listening to the same distant voice. Yoda extinguished his lightsaber without warning. The sudden disappearance of the green blade caught friend and foe alike by surprise, freezing the battle for the briefest of moments. He stood perfectly still before the glowing cylinders, lowering his cane until it rested gently against the stone floor. His eyes met those of the nearest child, and his breathing settled into complete calm. "Fear," he said softly, "feeds this. It does. Fear we will not give." Terran trusted the Master instantly, though every instinct urged him to continue fighting. He lowered his own blade slightly, remaining ready while allowing silence to spread across the chamber. The commander's helmet turned toward Yoda. "Your surrender is unexpected," the distorted voice observed. Yoda shook his head almost imperceptibly. "Surrender?" he replied. "No, listening." His ears twitched as the faint humming beneath the chamber became clearer. The crimson pulses were not random. They followed an exact cadence hidden beneath the machinery, one that echoed the ancient songs Sarad had described only moments earlier. The sanctuary itself had become an instrument, repeating fragments of inherited memory carried through generations of bloodlines, until they merged into a single pattern. Keelan stared at the children with growing disbelief. Through the fear clouding his thoughts, another sound slowly emerged from beneath the mechanical hum. At first he believed he imagined it. Then he recognized the melody. It was the same lullaby his mother had sung every winter before the evening meal, a song so ordinary he had never questioned where it came from. Looking around the chamber, he realized several of the children were moving their lips almost imperceptibly. They were singing without voices, completing verses preserved within memory alone. Each family had carried only a fragment. Together, they formed the whole. Sarad's expression changed as understanding struck him. He rushed toward one of the ancient stone pedestals lining the chamber, sweeping aside broken debris until he uncovered faded carvings matching the rhythm of the melody. "Not a navigational chart," he whispered in astonishment. "A sequence." His fingers raced across the symbols as generations of inherited teachings finally revealed their true purpose. The map was never hidden inside documents. It was hidden inside us. He looked toward Yoda. "The songs unlock it. The sanctuary translates them." Davian emerged from behind the shattered pillar, his shoulder blackened by a blaster burn sustained during the fighting. Pain twisted across his face, yet his eyes remained fixed upon the children rather than his wound. "That's what they wanted," he said hoarsely. "They never needed our records. They needed every surviving bloodline in one place." He looked toward the armored commander with quiet horror. "You planned this from the beginning." The commander offered no denial. Instead, he continued holding the small black device, watching the sanctuary awaken exactly as intended. Ancient mechanisms hidden for centuries responded to the completed sequence. Stone beneath the central platform trembled, not with the violence of collapsing architecture, but with deliberate precision. Massive rings carved into the floor rotated against one another, revealing intricate star patterns concealed beneath layers of polished rock. Narrow beams of pale light rose upward from the moving rings, intersecting above the chamber until they formed a three-dimensional projection of unfamiliar hyperspace routes extending far beyond the known outer rim. Even Yoda had never seen this region represented upon any Republic chart. The commander's attention shifted entirely toward the luminous projection. "At last," he said quietly, "the sanctuary of Kairos." Though electronically distorted, the voice carried unmistakable satisfaction. Hidden for 7 centuries, Terran committed every visible detail to memory even as he advanced carefully toward the commander. "What is Kairos?" he demanded. The armored figure gave a short, almost amused laugh. A question no longer worth answering. Before anyone could react, he pressed another control concealed within the black device. The projection flickered violently. Every crystal cylinder began releasing thick clouds of white vapor as hidden locks disengaged simultaneously. The transparent walls slid open with sharp mechanical clicks, and the children sagged forward into the arms of those closest to them. Their eyes closed once more, slipping into ordinary sleep as the crimson glow vanished from the chamber. At the same instant, the star map overhead fragmented into thousands of brilliant points before collapsing inward upon itself. Every line of the ancient route disappeared, leaving behind only empty air. "No!" Sarad cried, rushing toward the fading light. The commander turned away from the shattered projection. "It has already been transmitted." He reached for a compact device mounted against his armored collar. Yoda's eyes widened. "Stop him!" Terran launched himself forward through the Force, closing the distance with extraordinary speed. His lightsaber swept downward in a precise arc, aimed not at the man but at the transmitter fixed to his armor. The blade struck true, slicing through metal in a shower of molten sparks. Yet before the damaged device struck the ground, the commander pressed a final concealed switch beneath his glove. A violent explosion of white light erupted around him. The blast threw Terran backward across the stone floor, extinguishing lights throughout the cavern and shaking the mountain from its foundations. When the glare finally faded, the armored commander had vanished completely. Only fragments of scorched armor remained where he had stood, along with the ruined transmitter split cleanly in two. Whether the man had been vaporized or escaped by means unknown, no trace of him lingered within the chamber. Yoda slowly lowered his gaze toward the broken transmitter, his expression more troubled than relieved. The children were alive. The defenders had survived. The House of Memory still stood, though badly damaged. Yet the greatest danger had slipped beyond their reach. Somewhere in the vastness of the galaxy, someone had received the final transmission carrying the location of the long-hidden sanctuary of Kairos. Whatever had slept beyond those forgotten hyperspace routes for 7 centuries was no longer hidden. The battle was over. The true race had only just begun. The silence that followed the battle felt heavier than the fighting itself. Smoke drifted lazily through shattered arches, while broken stone continued to fall from high above, striking the cavern floor with dull echoes that faded into the sound of the underground waterfalls. Terran rose slowly, bruised but uninjured, and extinguished his lightsaber as the surviving defenders emerged from hiding to aid the wounded. The black-armored soldiers who remained alive had either surrendered or lain unconscious where the battle had ended, their strange equipment already being gathered for examination. None carried insignia, personal records, or identification of any kind. Whoever had sent them had planned carefully for failure as well as success. The crystal chambers stood open now, their ancient mechanisms finally silent after centuries of faithful service. One by one, the children awoke naturally, confused and exhausted, but otherwise unharmed. Keelan hurried among familiar faces, helping younger children find blankets and reassuring those who searched desperately for missing parents. Tears replaced fear as brothers embraced sisters and neighbors recognized one another across the damaged sanctuary. Sarad watched quietly from a distance, relief softening features that had carried the burden of impossible choices for decades. He had stolen their freedom in the hope of preserving their lives, and though history might judge him harshly, the children still breathed. Yoda walked slowly around the circular platform where the star map had briefly appeared. The luminous projection had vanished completely, leaving behind only ancient rings of carved stone that no longer responded to touch or the Force. He knelt beside the center of the mechanism, studying scorch marks left by the commander's transmission device. Terran joined him without speaking, waiting until the Grand Master finished his examination. At last, Yoda rose, resting both hands upon his cane. "Destroyed, the map is," he said quietly, "but copied before that, it was." His voice carried no frustration, only acceptance of a truth that could no longer be changed. Sarad approached, carrying the weathered parchment bearing Yoda's centuries-old signature. During the battle, it had been carefully protected beneath fallen stone, surviving where so much else had not. The old guardian held it respectfully before the Grand Master. "Our ancestors believed the Jedi would one day return," he said. "Perhaps they waited longer than they should have. Perhaps we judged your order too harshly." He lowered his eyes briefly. "The responsibility for what happened here belongs to my family as well. We allowed fear to become secrecy, and secrecy became imprisonment. The admission cost him dearly, yet he offered it without excuse." Yoda accepted the ancient document with gentle hands. His gaze lingered upon the faded signature written by his younger self so many centuries before. Memory had returned more fully. During the long hours since the battle, he remembered frightened settlers, desperate evacuations, promises sincerely made, and countless emergencies that had drawn the Jedi across a galaxy forever, demanding impossible choices. He also remembered believing that another generation would continue watching over these distant families. That assumption had slowly become neglect as centuries passed and records disappeared into forgotten archives. "Mistakes," he said softly, "even the Jedi make. Learn from them. We must." Nearby, Davian sat against a cracked pillar while one of the rescued settlers bandaged the burn across his shoulder. He looked older than he had only hours before. The confidence that had sustained him through years of deception had vanished, leaving behind a weary man forced to face the consequences of his choices. When Serad approached, neither brother spoke immediately. They simply regarded one another across years of anger, misunderstanding, and grief. Finally, Davian lowered his head. "I believed I could bargain with shadows," he said. "Instead, I opened the door for them." Serad knelt beside him and placed a hand upon his uninjured shoulder. "Then help us close it." The defenders searched the fallen attackers throughout the remainder of the day. Their armor proved sophisticated but deliberately anonymous, every serial number removed, and every data core erased beyond recovery. Yet one discovery remained. Hidden within the commander's ruined transmitter lay a tiny fragment of crystal that had survived the explosion. Though badly damaged, it contained traces of a partial hyperspace transmission, too incomplete to reveal the location of Kairos itself. It did, however, preserve the direction in which the message had been sent. The signal had not traveled toward the core worlds. It had vanished deeper into the unexplored reaches beyond the outer rim, into regions where Republic charts dissolved into empty space. As the evening settled over the valley, families reunited outside the House of Memory, beneath skies clearing for the first time in many days. Parents embraced children they had feared lost forever, while militia from Captain Soul's column finally reached the hidden settlement after following the damaged trails left by the battle. Questions filled the air, faster than answers could be given, yet hope had returned with the rescued captives. Fires were lit across the ancient terraces, and for the first time since the disappearances began, laughter rose once more between the forgotten stone walls. The old sanctuary had fulfilled its final purpose. It had preserved life long enough for the truth to emerge. Before dawn the following morning, Yoda and Terran prepared to depart aboard the Jedi courier. Serad stood beside the landing platform, with Keelan and many of the rescued families gathered nearby. The ancient parchment, the scarred Republic medallion, and every surviving record from the House of Memory had been entrusted to the Jedi Order so they could be preserved within the temple archives rather than forgotten again. In return, Yoda promised that a permanent Jedi presence would once more watch over the region. It was not offered as repayment for an old debt. It was simply the right course at last. As the courier lifted above the forests, Terran looked back through the cockpit canopy at the valley disappearing beneath morning mist. "Do you believe they will find Kairos?" he asked quietly. Yoda watched the distant horizon where endless wilderness met the rising sun. "Try," he answered. "Certainly." His expression remained thoughtful, but there was quiet confidence beneath it. "Prepared we will be. Hidden no longer this history is." He closed his eyes briefly as the stars awaited beyond the atmosphere. Somewhere in the darkness, an unseen enemy now possessed a fragment of a forgotten path, but the Jedi possessed something equally valuable: the truth. And in a galaxy where shadows so often flourished through forgotten lies, the truth was sometimes the strongest light of all. The official report submitted to the Jedi Council omitted many details. It recorded the rescue of the missing families, the destruction of an unidentified criminal network, and the recovery of valuable historical records from an ancient frontier settlement. The existence of the House of Memory, the hereditary map, and the hidden sanctuary of Kairos were sealed within the highest level of the temple archives, accessible only to the council itself. The black-armored soldiers were never identified, and the commander's body was never found. Yet from that day forward, whenever Yoda reviewed missions assigned to the Outer Rim, his attention lingered a little longer upon the forgotten worlds between the stars. He had learned that even the oldest promises could cast long shadows if left unattended, and he intended that this one would never again be abandoned. If you follow the long history of the galaxy closely enough, you begin to notice that the greatest dangers rarely arrive with fleets filling the stars or armies marching beneath banners. More often they begin with forgotten promises, neglected duties, and quiet choices that seem too small to matter in their own moment. That is why the struggle between light and darkness has never belonged only to Jedi and Sith. It lives equally within ordinary families, hidden settlements, and people who decide whether to protect another life or to place their own fears first. You have seen that no bloodline is born noble or corrupt by itself. What endures is not ancestry alone, but the decisions each generation makes with what it has inherited. The Force, as this story reveals it, is not merely a source of extraordinary power. It is a bond connecting memory, responsibility, and hope across centuries, binding together lives that may never meet. Those who sought the hidden sanctuary believed knowledge existed only to be possessed, controlled, or exploited, and so every mystery became another prize to seize. The Jedi, despite their wisdom, were reminded that good intentions cannot replace faithful vigilance, for even ancient guardians may overlook the quiet corners of the galaxy while answering louder calls elsewhere. Yet mistakes, honestly faced, need not become permanent defeats. The light does not demand perfection. It asks only that those who stumble choose to rise again. You may also have noticed that the greatest victory in this tale was not won by the brightest lightsaber or the strongest command of the Force. It emerged when pride yielded to truth, when brothers abandoned bitterness, when frightened children preserved hope without ever realizing the importance of the songs they carried. Even those who wandered onto darker paths were not beyond the reach of choice while breath remained within them. That has always been one of the quiet strengths of the Star Wars galaxy. Destiny may open a road, but every traveler still decides whether to continue walking toward the light or disappear into shadow. This is why the events of this forgotten world belong naturally beside the greater history of the Republic. The galaxy is vast beyond measure, filled with celebrated battles and legendary heroes, yet its future often turns upon places whose names never reach the Senate or the great halls of Coruscant. Every hidden valley, every isolated colony, and every promise whispered beneath distant stars forms another thread in the tapestry holding civilization together. When one thread is neglected, the fabric weakens. When even a single thread is repaired, hope quietly spreads farther than anyone can measure. And so, as the Jedi courier vanished into the endless heavens and the forests below slowly reclaimed their silence, life continued, much as it always had. Rain would again wash over the crimson soil, rivers would wind patiently through the ancient valleys, and morning mist would drift among trees older than memory itself. Somewhere within those quiet woods, children would grow into guardians who remembered not only the dangers that had passed, but the compassion that had preserved them. If you listen closely enough in that stillness, You may almost hear distant birds greeting another dawn where fear once ruled the silence. The forgotten world remains where it has always been, waiting beneath a pale orange star, no longer abandoned, but faithfully watched once more.